welcome. I'm here today with a brilliant bright light who I respect so much, and I'm so excited to have them introduce themselves on a podcast which is about mindfulness, compassion, and transpersonal frames on how we do healing within the helping professions and really just anyone who's in service. So the podcast is Starseed Counseling, and it's really this idea of cultivating our own ancestral work so we can be in service and of service in this world. So welcome.
Thank you so much.
So I'm wondering if we could start with just a little background of who are you and what is the work you do in the world?
Well, my name is Ji-hung, and that's a name given to me by my Korean Zen teacher. My path started when I was a high school student. I witnessed this car accident, and for a moment I froze. I just didn't know what to do. Because of that, I went and trained to be an emergency medical technician. And out of being an EMT, I had this big question about life, which brought me to pick up meditation as a college student. And I realized that this was about why are we alive, and what is this all for, and what is love, and how can we actually be of service, and all these things. So I moved into the Zen Center when I graduated from college, and I took jobs to support my meditation practice. One of those was at a clinic, an acupuncture clinic for people with AIDS, providing, alternative care. And this was in the early 90s, so actually it was pretty edgy. And out of that, this big question I had got deeper, and I went to Korea for a 90-day retreat, and I ordained as a nun at the end of it. So then I came back, and I was helping my Zen Center in the way that I do, but then I thought, well, what about helping my college? The college is where I found meditation, and I'm not going to give the biggest endowment, but maybe I can share my meditation practice. So then out of that, right at that time, the college was making this new model of chaplaincy in which chaplains of all different faiths would work together as a team to support the spiritual life of the community. So not only I had space, but a position, an office, a budget, all the good things. And it became very deeply fulfilling and creative. And so then that became my modality of service going forward. So since that time, I've been a chaplain at more colleges than I can count. But having done that, then I say to myself, who am I mentoring? And that's what brought me to mentor the next generation of college chaplains.
That's so beautiful. And what I'm really gleaming from that, Jihong, is really this dance with death and how existential questions of why are we here, who are we, who am I, was part of your seed that really opened up your mission for meditation practice, for being ordained, and then eventually for being of service on college campuses.
Yeah, I think it's pretty consistent.
I'm wondering if you could tell us, what does meditation mean to you personally, and how is that different from mindfulness?
Meditation takes many forms. I would say meditation and medicine have the same root meaning, which is to find a balance. And within meditation, we find our own inner balance, is what I would say. And as we do that, our body and mind are able to access that love and wisdom that is at our core. When things are out of balance, sometimes we don't know what to do, or we forget who we are. But when we come back into meditation, then we have access to that core.
So I hear that for you, meditation is finding balance within our core. It's finding center, and that root is love.
Yes, that is good. That's the root of it. That's what I would say.
Beautiful. I'm really interested in root systems, both in nature, in my body, in life. And I've studied a lot of Taoism. And what I've come to learn is the ancients really used nature as the primary teacher and really the first physician in problem solving any imbalance or dis-ease in the body. So I'm curious, in Zen Buddhism, how are we understanding and seeing ancestors as part of that root system?
Well, Thich Nhat Hanh says that if you look at your hand, in the palm of your hand, you can see your ancestors, right? Because the ancestors are in every cell of our body. Without our ancestors, this physical hand would not be here. So that is already a meditation upon interconnectedness. Sometimes the way that I envision it is through the image of Indra's net, which in our Mahayana system we borrow from Hinduism. And so if you imagine with this net, the horizontal threads of the net representing time, the vertical threads representing space, where each of those threads is meeting, there's a crystal. And each crystal is reflecting not only every other crystal, but every reflection of every other crystal. So just in that way, we're always composed of these reflections of each other. We're always coming into being together. And there's the temple rules in which Zen Master Baizhang, who created the rules that are used in Chinese and East Asian Mahayana Buddhism. One of the rules that really stuck with me is he says, if you can break the wall of yourself, you will become infinite in time and space. But if in this lifetime you cannot open your mind, you cannot digest even one drop of water. So from that perspective, I think certainly describing it from a way that's congruent with Mahayana tradition is that as we come to understand ourselves, we see how deeply connected we are. And very often we will describe that in these ways that represent our relationships in space. So we can say, here we are in this Naropa conference room. We wouldn't be here without the people who made the conference room, without the community of students who we serve. All of those things, those are representing Indra's net. But just as equally, the net extends, you could say, vertically through time. So we're here as a continuation of that thread of life that has never been diminished. You know, that all of those ancestors, before we were humans, we were animals and we were plants. And all of that is still together with us, with this vital spark of life that we carry. Joan Halifax, who has been influenced by earth-honoring traditions, says very often we think the ancestors are behind us. And in a way that's true, but actually they're in front of us, leading us forward. And to be in integrity in our practice is to recognize and honor this stream of life, because that is where our wholeness is. If we don't honor that wholeness, then we get caught up in what could be called the secondary satisfactions. We're looking for love in all the wrong places. We're addicted to consuming things. We need to go to Black Friday and do a lot of shopping. Or maybe we're addicted in this particular society to dominance, you know, to having the better car or just something a little nicer than the neighbors. I mean, that's been part of human nature also since the beginning, that we get caught up in things. But when we're not caught up in things, we return to those primary satisfactions, which is maybe sharing a meal with friends, having community, expressing love, being in nature. And when we have those, that's when we're at home with ourselves. If we don't have those and try to fill that need with the things, then it's actually never fulfilled. You could be a billionaire and still be kind of stretching out to get a little bit more. So that's, I think it relates both to healing on an individual level, but also on this sort of societal level. If we are not taking care of our connections, of our essential wholeness, then it's like there's this tear in the web of life. And if we pay attention, we can say, well, there's a little bit of a breach happens and I can mend that. I can mend the relationship with my mother or with my child or with my roommate. But if we're not paying attention, then that all those kind of tears catch up, and we end up with a family that has what we could call multigenerational trauma or unprocessed grief that gets amplified as it moves through the generations.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. I'm taking a moment to digest. And some things that are standing out and that really just resonated with my heart was this concept of the web. And in Chinese medicine, which we often, if you practice in the field, we call it the medicine, kind of like the way or a path inward, is that we have the 5 primary elements of wood, water, fire, earth. And I want to make sure I said all those. Wood, fire, metal is what I missed. But we also have the 6th element, which is the triple burner, the pericardium, which very much is the fascial system in the body. So in this way, I'm echoing with you of the pericardium is very much that connective glue. And it's responsible for all of the functional movements of the quadriceps, the back muscles. It holds everything together. And without adequately working fascial systems and fascial lines, the burden gets placed on bones or muscles. And so I'm really just taking in that metaphor of the ways in which generational trauma, when not dealt with, become much like a snowball, where maybe it started as a smaller wound and now it's a full body burden.
I feel like within our Western systems of knowing, some of the issue came about as at the time of Descartes. You know, when this kind of scientific revolution was beginning to take hold, and Descartes made this Cartesian error of separating out the body from spirit because he needed to divvy up so as not to get in trouble with the church. But by making body and mind seem as if they're separate things, then we end up with a mechanistic view of nature and our relationships, rather than recognizing that even the mind is embodied and relational. Once we recognize that the both and, that's kind of one thing that has two properties, then it actually gets easier to see how everything in our life is part of that web. And what we discuss, like this conversation, it brings people who are hundreds of miles away into conversation and relationship. And so the web has like many, there's many forms of it, many dimensions.
Many dimensions of the web. And I hear that for you, kind of a root pinpoint is really the separation or the error that mind, body, spirit are separate entities, when really I hear you saying they're embodied and they're relational. And so when I think of our current Western medical system and how we as a medical system pride ourselves in a specialty, just in a way how silly that is, that the foot, the foot doctor doesn't talk to the heart doctor. And there are these parceled out aspects of our consciousness. And so that kind of brings me to the next question of, yes, we're talking about separation of mind, body, spirit, but how are we understanding and holding human consciousness throughout all of this? Because in my experience, at least, ancestors have a very tactile, sensory motor quality for me, where I can feel warmth or cold sensory information, or I can feel emotional stimulation of love or compassion, even though that consciousness isn't in a body. So I'm wondering, how are we holding the consciousness around these concepts?
Well, I mean, I think that when we get down to it, if we move into the place of consciousness studies, that differentiation, the boundaries of the self are to some degree, they're really consensual rather than actual. And so as we are able to hold a bigger container for ourselves, while keeping, a kind of healthy self-differentiation for grounding, we're able to perceive, the wider world of which we are a part. My experience of that through doing long meditation retreats actually brought me into a place of more depth work. And when you step into that depth work, you can touch into it through a Soto Zen perspective in which we are just sitting and bringing that kinesthetic awareness in. You can touch into it through yoga, through indigenous practices. I have in mind to write this article. I'm going to call it 7 Different Ways to Find a Sweater in a Dark Room. Because as we increase our capacity to hold space in a kinesthetic way, we're able to perceive the fullness of what's there. In Zen tradition, there is a commentary on a koan, which says, when you see horns behind a wall, you know there is a cow. If you see smoke, you know there is a fire. So much of the koan practice is using your deep kinesthetic knowing and perception to perceive the 90% of the iceberg that is beneath the surface. But it's not a way of knowing that is exclusive to Zen, because you can do that same deep knowing with constellation work or with other forms of energy work. I think the important thing is to find a kind of door into that room, because I think that's where most of the holistic healing takes place.
Thank you for that. So for our viewers, for our listeners, it's about finding a door into the depth work, into that dark room within oneself, which eventually leads to this kind of Alice in Wonderland perspective of all that is, because we're connected to it through the web. But I really appreciated that you named this piece of a grounded sense of self, so that we're not disembodied or disassociated in this work. And I also appreciate that you named some modalities of how to get there. One experiential, one contemplation I'm receiving just from the title of your book is putting myself in a closet that's dark and looking for a sweater 7 different ways. Feels like I can go home and practice that very thing. And it kind of leads me to this other kind of like pulse of consciousness where the work of a medical doctor, I think he was a physician for a long time as well, but he talks, Stephen Hawkins, about there being levels, and he even associates numbers to these different levels of consciousness. So in the lower levels, that, like 200s, it's about greed or pride or kind of the things you mentioned, having the latest vehicle or the latest goods, so that your ego structure feels slightly inflated and you feel like someone in the world. But he talks about kind of at the 2 to 300, 400 is where we are able to move in to a place where we're going beyond that need, and we're able to hold attributes like love, freedom, forgiveness, and a bigger vision. And so I guess I'm also just wondering, like, how we might scaffold this for certain groups, because if I think of someone on a really low level of consciousness, and I don't mean this hierarchical, like I'm higher, you're lower, just his framing of these levels, it's more of like, how do we help someone see that competition isn't the only way, or greed isn't necessary if we're all interconnected? So I'm just curious your thoughts on scaffolding.
I think that one of the core necessities that we sometimes forget in our modern world is the necessity of, I would say, the descent. Being able to go down and have deep roots, because that is totally necessary to being able to do like a true ascension. Otherwise, we see these stories like, even Deepak Chopra. You think someone is at a higher scaffolding, but actually they neglected the ground level and actually made some serious mistakes. So that's what I really encourage, is the more that we're able to do our own deep tissue work, which is, can we make friends with our wounds? Can we go into the place of our trauma? Can we look at our relationships with our family? Can we make a good relationship with the earth, our original mother? Can we be humble before the earth? If we do that, that is going to give us a firm foundation. If we're able to do the descent into grief or other painful emotions, there's good mulch there. Out of that, then I'm totally sure that scaffolding into a higher consciousness is possible in a way that's sustainable.
Yeah, thank you. Sustainability for our inner gardening is often what I call it. So I'm really digging this metaphor of mulch. Or fertilizers. Sometimes when I refer to it as, it's like, oh my gosh, right now just heaps of fertilizer, in the
Yeah.
collective. And if we're able to work with that, then it really becomes nutritious chemical compounds that we need for these seeds within us, these star seeds, to start to take root so that we are blooming, or so that if a windstorm happens, which tends to happen in the geography where we're located, is we can see if a tree is pulled up and the roots are really shallow, that's problematic because the entire tree falls over. So I really love this notion of being aware of our fertilizer, which I would also, in a more Jungian perspective, maybe call shadow work, both personal or collective, and having the window of tolerance, of course. So not overwhelming our nervous system, our full body system in that process, but going little bits of that expansion. So I'm curious, and I love being here with you because I just feel like we are very much inner gardeners in service to others, helping them tend to the weeds of jealousy, greed, the shadow, and helping nourish the things that are upcoming and growing. And so I'm curious, like if you could give our audience, our viewers, like 3 tools. What 3 tools would you maybe give folks on this journey for the different levels of consciousness?
Oh, well, all right. I'm going to start with gratitude. Simply having a practice of gratitude. I have a friend who goes out at sunrise every day with a glass of water and simply gives gratitude for everything that he sees or that he touches or that he knows. And if you start the day like that, that's already a recognition of interconnection in a way that is likely to produce a positive result, because that seed is going to make contact with the universal law of cause and effect in a good way. Another tool that I would say is mindfulness, taking time to relax and come home to here, now, and this. Like as we do that, we ground ourselves. Even if we really want the situation to change, the best way to begin is by working with what is. So mindfulness. And then the third thing I would say is practices of kindness and compassion. If you feel under-resourced, the best way to change that is to practice kindness and giving to others. Because again, that wheel, that water wheel of compassion, it turns ceaselessly, and it will absolutely bring back what, in my experience, whatever it is that you've given, maybe even like tenfold.
3 tools for starting this process of scaffolding, of digging deep roots. Thank you for those 3 tools. So just to recap, we're looking at a practice of gratitude, even for the small things that just exist in the natural world, practicing mindfulness, and then starting to build on top of that compassion so that we are able to grow upwards to the ancestors, both in front of us, behind us, and all around. So thank you so much for taking some time to be with us.
Yes.
And maybe we can end that way so that we're planting some seeds of what is one thing you're feeling gratitude in your being right now.
Gratitude for the gift of friendship and for the auspicious coincidence that brought us together.
I'm feeling gratitude for the earth under my feet. And I just am really feeling the vibrational quality of everyone and everything who's ever walked in this spot or sat in it before me. And just feeling that blessing of the deep time.
Thank you.
Thank you.